now we can move on to the next canto. Papasaten Alepe. So this is one of the most dramatic openings of any of the cantos. It makes absolutely no sense. Innumerable linguistic professors have tried to figure out, what is this possibly? I see, Father Satan, something. Looks to me like a Latin imperative, doesn't it? Alepe, leap up, take warning, something like that. I don't know. Anyway, you can, if you're interested, go to the Dante project and click on this line and look at the commentaries, all kinds of possible interpretations. Most commentators say it's no language at all, that this monster has no human language. Papasaten Alepe, so Plutus. Plutus is probably here not Pluto, the king of the underworld in classical mythology, but Plutus, the god of wealth. So Plutus with his grating voice began. The gentle sage, aware of everything, said reassuringly, "Don't let your fear defeat you, for whatever power he has, he cannot stop our climbing down this crag." I'm not going to read all of this, it's taking too much time. So in any case, Virgil is able to deflate the power of Plutus simply by telling him that this journey has been willed by God, right? This journey is a divine one. At the bottom of the page, we see the punishment here. Even as waves that break above Charybdis. Charybdis is the whirlpool. Remember down at the between the toe of the boot of Italy and Sicily, there's the Straits of Messina, this very narrow sea passage. And in classical mythology, on one side there was Scylla, who was a monster in the rocks that reached down and grabbed people. And on the other side there was a whirlpool that sucked the ships down. So even as the waves broke in this whirlpool of Charybdis, each shattering the other when they meet, so must the spirits here dance their round dance. So here's a strange punishment. It's a kind of dance. It's a kind of riddy, it's called, to a kind of a folk dance, a kind of a circle dance. Here more than elsewhere I saw multitudes to every side of me. Their howls were loud, while wheeling weights they used their chests to push. So multitudes, because for Dante, in the late Middle Ages, the most common sin was no longer pride, which used to be, the root of all evil, but now it's avarice, right? It's over-concern with material things. So they're doing a round dance and they're wheeling weights. They struck against each other. At the point, each turned around, wheeling back those weights, and cried out, "Why do you hoard? Why do you squander?" So it's two types. It's really a good insight. Not just avarice, but also wasting money. The two go together. You work all week to get your money, and then on the weekends you go out and you waste it. They're complementary failings. So did they move around the sorry circle from left to right to the opposing point. Again they cried their chant of scorn. And so when each of them had changed positions, he circled halfway back to his next joust. Well, if you have any trouble, there's a diagram. So it's remember the shape of hell is circular. So here's one group going around like this, and the other group going around like this, and they clash together, and then they turn and they go back and clash together. It's a beautiful kind of symbol for the endless round of obsession with material things, a kind of motion, but there's no progress. And Dante has this beautiful passage: "For all the gold that is or ever was beneath the moon could never offer rest to even one of these exhausted spirits." You have to ask yourself, these guys that are making like $100 million a year, what are they ever going to spend that on? So how much is enough, right? No amount seems to be enough for some of these hedge fund managers and other people like that. Okay. So the god of wealth is worshipped in Chinese society traditionally. Saishan, right? Not so common in Beijing on the mainland, but in Macau, almost every shop, every little store has an altar at the back with the god of wealth, and usually electric candles, not real candles. Maybe an old orange, something there. They're not too religious, but on the other hand, why take a chance? I think that's their idea. So in the West, the attitude towards wealth has been more ambivalent. In the New Testament, poverty is idealized. The model is Jesus himself, whose mortal father was a carpenter, who was born in a cattle stall. There's the Annunciation triptych of Robert Campine. Joseph, here's this is the patron, I guess, that commissioned the painting. Here is the beautiful scene of the angel and Mary. And there's old Joseph working in his carpentry shop, right? This is apparently one of the problems that the Christian missionaries had when they came to China. The Chinese just did not want to have anything to do with a religion that was founded by someone that was born in a cattle stall. They just, it's so, he's supposed to be the King of Heaven. How could his dignity be so compromised in his birth? There's the nativity with Christ lying on the ground, right? Not a good thing for a baby. One of Christ's central teachings was praise of poverty and criticism of wealth. Blessed are the poor, for of such is the kingdom of God. It's this one I love. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Think of the eye of a needle. Think of a camel fighting it through there. Beautiful image. In accordance with this teaching, those taking posts in the medieval church were required to make a vow, a promise of poverty. So priests and monks and nuns and friars still have to say they will own no property, right? They will personally not have wealth. They're supposed to remain simply having what's necessary for life. Chaucer's parson is a good example. St. Benedict, the founder of monasticism, St. Francis, the founder of the friars, and Mother Teresa, say, in our own time. Here's the legend of St. Francis by Giotto. Remember, Giotto was a contemporary of Dante's. The renunciation of worldly goods. St. Francis was a very wealthy young man, the heir of a very important family. He was out riding one day. He saw a leper and he had a conversion. He got off his horse. He embraced the leper. He decided to serve the poor. He decided he would give up all of his goods, including his clothes. And so Giotto shows this scene of in the marketplace, Assisi, taking off all of his clothes and here's his father, who thinks that he's got a son that's gone insane, right? And yet the medieval church itself was immensely wealthy, the papacy, but also the monasteries, the convents. You remember that when Henry VIII broke with the Church of Rome, the first thing he did was confiscate all the wealth of the monasteries, because there were huge tracts of land and ornaments and so forth, so that he really made his government much more powerful and much more wealthy by breaking with Rome. In the Middle Ages, being wealthy was not an abstract number in a computer, but the possession of bags of beautiful, heavy gold coins. And that's the florin. That was the reserve currency of the Middle Ages. Beautiful coin, 3.5 grams of gold to a certain purity. It was kept, genuine florins were strictly regulated as to the amount of gold that they contained. So you can kind of you read these Renaissance plays about misers like Volpone and Jew of Malta and so forth, and in this sort of Volpone holds up a gold coin, like the priest holds up the Eucharist in the Mass. This is my God, you kind of see, if it's real gold, you can, just looking at that, I begin feeling avaricious myself, It's a lot different than just seeing a number on a piece, here's your bank account, okay, I've got X number of renminbi in it. Western attitude towards wealth has been both negative and positive. In the 20th century, you get the 60s generation, the hippies or the flower children, who reject consumer society that grows up after the war. They grew their own food, they wore secondhand clothes, they had beards and long hair, they rode bicycles. Some of your professors, your Western professors, you can maybe recognize as members of this group. They shared their possessions, they lived in agricultural communes. More recently, you have the yuppie generation, young urban professionals, so-called greed culture. This turns the Christian teaching about poverty upside down. Greed becomes a virtue. Sharing becomes a sin. See this played out in the current presidential campaign in the U.S., right? Everyone will be happiest if we each maximize our own financial gain. To sacrifice individual profit for some supposed broader social or environmental goal is foolish. And this is an idea that goes way back. To be financially rich is a sign of God's favor. Therefore, if you're poor, it must be your own fault. Wonder today, with the financial crisis, the fraudulent practices of the Wall Street traders, will there be a disillusionment with greed? Obama said at one time it was wrong. It combined breathtaking greed of a few with irresponsibility across the system, and it plunged our economy and the world into a crisis from which we are still fighting to recover. And then, of course, you have the Occupy Wall Street movement. There are the bankers. Dante's great insight is that misuse of wealth includes conspicuous consumption as well as avarice. In a society focused on the possession of material things, consumption is just as much of a problem as avarice. They both lead to frustration and unhappiness. In Dante's Florence, as in affluent societies today, money is spent not for what people really need, but simply for recreation. Closets full of clothes that are never worn, banquets in which most of the food is never eaten. There's the diagram. There's a manuscript illumination. Dante and Virgil. This is Plutus. Right? This is he's collapsed. What this is, I don't know. Somebody can figure that out. I don't know. And here are this is like the first, it's like a cartoon. This is the first panel of the cartoon. And then the second panel, they're watching the hoarders and the wasters pushing their rocks around the circle. And you can see this guy's wearing a kind of a hat that looks like a merchant's hat. And that other Tyrea, that's the Pope's hat, the three-leveled hat of the Pope. So Dante then asks about the souls. There's no conversation in this part of hell. Nobody to talk to because they're really sort of beneath the human, beneath the status of human beings because they dedicated themselves to the worship of something material. So all these to left and right were so squint-eyed of mind, says Virgil, line 40. In the first life, no spending that they did was done with measure. So there's the flaw, lack of moderation. Talk about that in a moment. Their voices bark this out with clarity when they have reached the 2 points of the circle where their opposing guilts divide their ranks. Those to the left, their heads bereft of hair, because in the Middle Ages, clerics shaved their heads, a tonsure, shaved a little hole in their heads there as a sign of their ecclesiastical office. Those to the left, their heads bereft of hair, were clergymen. They were members of the church, and popes and cardinals, with whom avarice works its excess. And I to him, Master, among this kind I certainly might hope to recognize some who have been bespattered by these crimes. And he to me, that thought of yours is empty. The undiscerning life that made them filthy now renders them unrecognizable. Notice that the left and the right here are symbolic. Left, 90%, between 80 and 90% of the people in the world are right-handed. So left is always the weak side, the side of ignorance and dark. I hope none of you are left-handed, or if you are, this doesn't apply to you. You know, the idea that in Latin, sinister is the word that means left. And that comes into English meaning evil, right? Sinister. So the left is the bad side. And so the souls on the left, according to Dante, are more culpable than the souls on the right. And the souls on the left are the avaricious. So even though he has avariciousness and consumption, equally punished in this circle, there's still a bit of a gradation. Avarice is still a little bit less good than wasting or conspicuous consumption. So for all eternity they'll come to blows and so forth. It occurs to me that maybe the image of these souls pushing these rocks, I don't know if you've read Thoreau's Walden. This was a book that when I was your age, and sort of counterculture, we were reading this book a lot. We had this book sort of like the Little Red Book, So this was we read Walden, that told us everything we wanted to know about. And Thoreau was this person who opted out. That's what we call opt out, means choose not to live in mainstream society, but go off and live a different kind of life by yourself. So he took an axe and went to the woods and built himself a cabin by Walden Pond, and he lived there by the labor of my hands only. And then he talks about the society of his day, and he says the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. And the desperation comes from being burdened by all of these material goods. He says, now this isn't a day when material possessions meant having land rather than having money or a bank account or a fancy car or something. They have got to live a man's life pushing all these things, all of these material things before them, and get on as well as they can. How many a poor immortal soul have I met, well nigh crushed and smothered under its load, creeping down the road of life, pushing before it a barn 75 feet by 40, its Augean stables never cleansed, and 100 acres of land, tillage, mowing, pasture, and woodlot. So it seems to me there's a intertextual relationship there. Dante's criticism of the church that we've just seen, Master, show me now what shades are these, and tell me if they all were clerics. So, that's the implication is, there's a lot of members of the church in this part of hell. So, here and throughout, the comedy is filled with biting criticisms of the corruption of the church. And you find the same kind of thing in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, but maybe not quite as vehement. Dante gets extremely angry over this. Here is Beatrice and Dante discussing the corruption of the church and some of the souls in heaven, while we get a picture of Florence, and the devil is giving church officials, pouring money into church officials' hands. So the devil is the one that's corrupting the church there. So does this mean, some students think, Dante was a kind of forerunner of Martin Luther, of the Protestant Reformation? Well, not necessarily. Because for medieval Christians, it was possible to criticize the abuses of individual members of the church without attacking the institution of the church. There was a heresy, the Donatist heresy. And what the Donatists taught was that if you get baptized by a priest who is committing adultery, the baptism is not valid. Or if you're given confession by a priest who is a thief, the confession is not valid. And so the church condemned this. That's what a heresy is. Heresy is a belief which has been formally proclaimed by the church to be incorrect. So the Orthodox position was that no, the sacraments, the ceremonies performed by the priest are valid independent of the character, the moral character of the priest himself. So Dante likewise wanted the holders of church offices to be more true to their spiritual calling, but did not call for a change in the institution. Luther attacked some of the central doctrines of the institution, like transubstantiation, clerical celibacy, the primacy of the Pope, and so forth. So the distinction between person and institution continues to be fundamental in political discourse today. When I first came to China, I can't remember who was president. I'm very, very seldom pleased with our political leaders, and I must have been saying something about Nixon. I can't imagine, 1980 would that be. Anyway, that damn Nixon, and one is, how can you say that, And I said, no, it's okay. You can, I'm not a revolutionary, right? I'm just criticizing that particular politician. And it seemed like they were thinking that if you criticize the politician, you're criticizing the whole structure of the country. So it's possible in the West for a citizen or a newspaper to vilify a corrupt president or prime minister without wishing to change the actual structure of the government. And that's that same situation. Dante is not really a Protestant. He doesn't want the church to be fundamentally overthrown or changed in its doctrines, but he's attacking the abuses of the individual members of the church that he felt were, the church itself is not attacked. The role of fortune. So at the very end of the canto here, bottom of page 61, now you can see, my son, says Virgil, how brief's the sport of all those goods that are in fortune's care, for which the tribe of men contend and brawl. For all the gold that ever is or was beneath the moon could never offer rest to even one of these exhausted spirits. Master, I asked of him, now tell me too, this fortune whom you've touched upon just now, what's she who clutches so all the world's goods? And he to me, oh, unenlightened creatures, how deep the ignorance that hampers you. I want you to digest my word on this. So if you look over at the Italian, imboche means take into your mouth. So he's saying, you're like a little baby, and I'm going to feed you the truth about fortune. And then we get his explanation of the role of fortune, which is a very important idea for medieval and Renaissance literature. The usual medieval idea of the pagan gods we've talked about. They were thought to be devils in disguise, tricking human beings into worshipping them. Charon, Plutus, the Titans, and so forth, this kind of god-demon. But Dante does not demonize the goddess, the Roman goddess Fortuna. Rather, he makes her an agent of the Christian God, a kind of servant of the Christian God. He says she directs events in the earthly sphere the same way that angels guide the motion of the other heavenly spheres, the sphere of the moon, the sphere of Mars and Venus and Jupiter, the stellarium, and so forth. But by constantly changing the earthly assignment of material goods, power, wealth, social status, and so forth, she teaches human beings not to expect lasting happiness from the possession of such goods. Well, Dante gets his idea here from Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy, a work we mentioned earlier, which you could take a look at if you're interested in the subject of the role of fortune. The common artistic and literary image is of a wheel, fortune turning a wheel. And here you get a typical 14th century example. Fortuna, fortune is up back here, she's depicted as a woman. This is her wheel. And here you see a king at the top of fortune's wheel. And then as the wheel turns, you see a character who is sort of on his way down. Here you see a beggar, we call a street person today. He doesn't even have any clothes, absolutely at the bottom of his fortune. And then here's some kind of agricultural labor. He's got a scythe, he's coming up. And so constantly human fortune changes. If you're on top of fortune's wheel, the only thing you're sure of is that you'll soon be going down, and the consolation is if you're at the bottom, you have hopes of going up again, constant change. Of course, Dante and other medieval Renaissance writers didn't believe fortune was an actual goddess. She was a literary fiction, a personification of the concept of the transitory nature of all earthly goods. In the De Monarchia, he says that the distribution of worldly goods, which the pagans attributed to the power of fortune, we call by the more appropriate and accurate name, divine providence. So it's part of God's plan. Fortune is part of God's plan. Okay, so at the end of class last time we were just talking about Dante's conception of the idea of fortune. And as I was mentioning, this is a motif or a kind of allegorical figure that comes back again and again, not only in medieval literature but also in Renaissance and later literature. You find the motif of fortune turning her wheel in Shakespeare, as well as in Chaucer, as well as in Dante. So this is on page 63, Canto VII. Remember, Virgil says, "O unenlightened creatures, how deep the ignorance that hampers you. I want you to digest my word on this." And then he gives Dante the authoritative explanation of what fortune is and how fortune works. Remember, Dante had said, what is this fortune that we hear about here, and why are all of worldly goods in fortune's care? Who is this who clutches all the world's goods? So Dante sees fortune as herself a kind of miser, a person or a creature who is avaricious. So Virgil sets Dante straight and talks about how fortune is a general minister and guide, and her role is to shift from time to time. Those empty goods from nation unto nation, clan to clan, in ways that human reason can't prevent. So you think of all the attempts to predict the stock market. You know, this would be an attempt to prevent the work of fortune, to try to outwit fortune. But as Virgil explains, this is impossible. Fortune's whole nature is to constantly reallocate worldly wealth and worldly honor and worldly power, so that human beings will learn the lesson not to trust in anything material as the basis of their ultimate happiness, right? It's sort of a moral teaching mechanism. So at the bottom of the page, then, we get the transition to the next major division of the underworld, which is the swamp of Styx. So Styx is one of the classical, in classical mythology, Styx is one of the rivers of the underworld. Dante envisions it as less of a river and more of a swamp, like a very wide, stagnant, dirty pool of water or liquid. Bottom of page 63, then, we crossed the circle to the other shore. We reached a foaming water course that spills into a trench formed by its overflow. The stream was even darker than deep purple, and we, together with those shadowed waves, moved downwards and along a strange pathway. When it has reached the floor of those malign grey slopes, that melancholy stream descends, forming a swamp that bears the name of Styx. And I, who was intent on watching it, could make out muddied people in that slime, all naked, and their faces furious. So at this point, Dante reaches that part of hell where souls who were angry, overcome by anger in their lives on earth, are punished. So it's kind of hard for us to think, is anger a sin? When I was working as a dean in Canada, We had various problems with faculty members. We had one who was an alcoholic. That's a big problem, you know. We had to counsel him, say, if you don't get this under control, we'll have to, let you go and so forth. He signed up for a program of counseling, Alcoholics Anonymous, where he got some help, and then he was able to continue teaching without problems. Another faculty member, the first time I'd ever come across this, was angry all the time. And he got very angry at the students. He got very angry at his colleagues. He was threatening people. And so he had to take courses in what's called anger management. They have a similar kind of program for people that can't control their anger. And so Dante sees anger as a sin, unjustified anger. We'll talk about that in a moment. Getting angry for no good reason, right? And there are two types of anger that he sees here. There's active anger, which is these people that he sees in the river fighting each other with their faces furious. They struck each other not with hands alone, but with their heads and chests and with their feet, and tore each other piecemeal with their teeth. The kindly master told me, "Son, now see the souls of those whom anger has defeated." So here it's pretty clear that the punishment, if you want to call it that, is just an extension of the behavior that these souls engaged in life. So this is what we call what I call karmic contrapasso, right? Just an extension of the same behavior. And it's their anger that's their punishment. They have no other punishment, right? Anger is what has defeated them, both in their lives on earth and also in the afterlife. So that's the actively angry souls. But there are also souls that are what you might call sullen, who are bitter, who hold their anger in and just are constantly dissatisfied and unhappy in life. And they take that out on other people in subtle ways. So in my experience, these are the more dangerous kind of people. And Dante seems to think they're the more serious sinners because they don't even show themselves above the surface of the swamp. They're actually submerged. Virgil goes on and he says, "And I should have you know for certain that underneath the water there are souls who sigh and make this plain of water bubble, as your eyes, looking anywhere, can tell. Wedged in the slime, they say, we had been sullen. In the sweet air that's gladdened by the sun, we bore the mist of sluggishness in us, and now we are bitter in the blackened mud." So Dante can't even see these souls. They're below the surface. This hymn they have to gurgle in their gullets because they cannot speak it in full words. At one point I got very interested in the whole question of language in the Inferno and how frequently sin is connected with inability to speak or garbled language or language which is incomprehensible. Think of Plutus, papasatan, alepe, whatever that means. So here, these souls, they can't really speak openly. They just gurgle in their gullets their lament. We had been sullen. Sullen is a word that means hidden anger. Hidden anger. Anger that's below the surface, right? And so between the dry shore and the swamp, we circled much of that disgusting pond. Our eyes came upon the swallowers of slime. Our eyes upon the swallowers of slime. We came at last upon a tower's base. So this is, again, if you're looking at, formal aspects of the poem, which you should be doing, as well as, of course, the various characters and themes and so forth, but just the formal structure, you can look at how Dante opens cantos and also how he ends cantos. Frequently, as here, he, how in Sanguo, the author always says, did Cao Cao win this battle? If you want to know the answer, read the next chapter. Well, it's sort of the same thing. Sometimes Dante will end a canto with something that causes suspense. We came upon a tower's base, and you want to know what tower? What is this, right? So the reader is motivated to turn the page and get an answer to the question.